Hello and a warm welcome to all bookshop crawlers. My name is Reese, and today I have the pleasure of spending a little time with author, newsreader, and radio presenter Zeb Soanes. Zeb, welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Reese. It's very nice to be asked.
So many of our viewers probably will have heard your dulcet tones on the radio, most recently on Classic FM as a presenter of, is it Smooth Classics?
That's it. Monday to Friday, 7 till 10.
There we go. But could you give us a little bit more info about yourself and what you do other than radio?
Yeah, well, I was born in Suffolk, in Lowestoft, the most easterly point in the country, and I grew up writing a lot. Actually, poetry at school. I was the school poet at my junior school, and if ever a visitor was coming to the school, the headmistress, Mrs. Norris, would always ask me to compose something for whoever was coming to the school. And then when I went to university, to UEA, I did creative writing and drama. And acting was always the route that I was heading into. And then I got into the BBC as a television announcer, which was only meant to be a kind of brief thing in between acting jobs. And then that got extended and extended. And I ended up being there for 25 years. And I went from television to Radio 4, presented the proms along the way, which is where my connection with orchestras really built. And then writing children's books started in 2017, all sparked by a chance encounter with an urban fox. But it's been delightful because it's kind of joined up all those different elements of my life: the love of writing, music, and telling stories.
Very good. That is actually going to be my next question. Actually, I do know the story about Gaspard already, and have obviously seen the video footage as well. But just for those who aren't aware, Gaspard, it's written by yourself, illustrated beautifully by James Mayhew. He's got a very interesting history. Could you give us a little info about where the idea came from?
Yeah, well, one day I was a newsreader on Radio 4 for 20 years, and that meant some pretty unsocial shifts. So I used to leave for work at 4 o'clock in the morning or arrive home about 1:30 in the morning. And this is a perfect time for foxes. And anyone who lives in London knows that there are foxes everywhere. I mean, there are at least 30 to every square mile. And I've got about 12 living just behind my flat here in Islington. And I came home and there was the most beautiful fox on the street in front of me, and it had an injured leg. So I ran upstairs, raided the fridge, got some cheese and some wafer thin ham, brought it down to the fox. Fox went away, perfectly happy. And then a couple of weeks later, I saw the fox again, recovered, and it just kept visiting. And I stopped feeding the fox, but it got to know the sound of my folding bicycle when I came home from work. And I'd be folding up the Brompton, and suddenly the fox had not so much as appeared, because they're very quiet, but manifested next to me. And so we started just kind of hanging out together, and I would be able to sit on my front doorstep with this fox, almost hip to hip, watching the world go by. And I was taking photographs of it, and it just went all over the world. And friends had said to me, you know, this is quite extraordinary, this relationship with this wild animal. You should write about it. And I kind of put it to the back of my mind. And then one day I was on a very long train journey, and I sketched out the arc of the first Gaspard the Fox story. And 4 books later, here we are.
Yes, indeed. I've got the first one here actually. So this is this. Oh, you're not going to see it because of my blur. But this is actually. I was going to mention this later. This is actually quite special to us because we actually bought this on a bookshop crawl in 2018, and we bought it from Word on the Water, who obviously is illustrated in the book. They're very, very proudly, I think they still do. They've still got it on sale just outside the.
Well, there was an amazing occasion. My nieces were visiting, and I was taking them around King's Cross. We'd had lunch, and I said, let's just pop and have a look at Word on the Water, which is where they're moored permanently now. Yeah. And we went onto the boat, and I kid you not, it was like a setup. There was a mother reading Gaspard the Fox to her son. You know, as an uncle, it was the proudest moment. But also as an author, to see your book being read I mean, there's no greater reward, really. And they always say you should write about what you know. Well, Word on the Water was an absolute gift. And in fact, living along the canal here in London, I mean, I had to make very little up because the annual London Canal Festival, which is the kind of central part of that story, is a real thing that takes place every September. So when I was looking for some opportunity, somewhere that a fox would come into contact with lots of human beings and for there to be lots of colour and activity and costumes and things going on, well, the Canal Festival was a gift, and Word on the Water in those days was still mobile. It still had a
Yeah, Word on the Water is one of the most popular stops during the bookshop crawl. It tends to be one of the ones that we include on most of our guided tours. And it's either a case of, oh, I've been here before, or oh my goodness, I didn't know it was here, and this is incredible.
It's completely magical. And whenever I talk to children in schools, I say, if you come to London, you can tick off several literary haunts in one stop, which is platform 9 3/4 at King's Cross Station, Harry Potter, and then Word on the Water.
Very good. You said there's 4 Gaspar books, and most recently you've been able to bring together your love of music and of literature as you've been able to do a tour. I think you've done, is it Gaspard the Fox Live?
Yeah, I did a tour of Gaspars Foxtrot with the Royal Scottish National Orchestra this time last year, all around Scotland. Over 100,000 Scottish children saw those concerts, which is amazing. Gaspar's very big north of Hadrian's Wall. And then Gaspar's Christmas, which came out last October, we premiered at the Usher Hall, again with the RSNO in December. And that all came about because when I first sat down with James Mayhew, I took him to lunch to ask him kind of trepidatiously if he would consider illustrating the first book. And it turned out we had all these things in common. We knew we were from the same hometown. There's about 10 to 15 years between us in terms of age, but we'd been to the same high school, which we didn't realize. And we'd, liked the same films. We had all these things in common. So we have a great working relationship because we have this fantastic shorthand, partly because we're from the same place and we have very similar outlooks on life, but loving the same films. There's a character in Gaspar Best in Show. She's the stout, bossy lady that runs the dog show. And I said to him, basically, it's Peggy Mount. And Peggy Mount was an actress who was famous for playing kind of very bombastic characters in old black and white comedies. He knew exactly who I meant. And so the character is just as I imagined. But James illustrates with orchestras. So he will live illustrate Scheherazade or Firebird or A Night on Bear Mountain while the orchestra plays, and he paints in time musically with his brushstrokes to the music. So I knew he did that. He knew that I narrated things like Peter and the Wolf with orchestras. And over that first lunch, he said, wouldn't it be amazing if one day one of these stories becomes an orchestrated work that he can paint live on stage and I can narrate? So that happened with Gaspars Foxtrot. And we were thrilled that Jonathan Dove, who's, one of our greatest living composers in this country, who happens to live along the canal in Gaspar's territory, said yes. So it's very much been planets in alignment with these books, having James and having Jonathan.
Very good. You said, obviously, Gaspar's Christmas is the most recent one. That one was written, I believe, as a charity fundraiser as well. Yes,
I mean, I wanted to do a Christmas story. I mean, London is beautiful at Christmas, and I've spent many Christmas days in London having to work and read the news because obviously, broadcasting doesn't stop, and London is incredible at that time because many people go away. So the city is very quiet, very still. There's very little traffic, and I wanted to capture that moment in London. And so Gaspar's Christmas is a much smaller, more intimate story. Gaspar finds a homeless man freezing to death on the street, and he and with his animal friends manage to get him to safety, to warmth in the homeless shelter in the local church, which again, write what you know, is something that really happens in my local church each Christmas. And I always thought, in the spirit of traditional Christmas stories, I wanted there to be a message to it. It wasn't just familiar characters frolicking around in the snow. And I've supported St. Martin in the Fields a lot over the years through the Radio 4 Christmas appeal, which supports them. And I thought, well, this is an obvious thing to support. And I was also mindful that J.M. Barrie gifted all of the Peter Pan royalties to Great Ormond Street Hospital. And so I thought, well, let's do that with Gaspars Christmas. And so in perpetuity, the royalties from this story in the series will always go to St. Martin's. So yeah, and James took no persuading. I mean, straight away he said yes, absolutely. So
brilliant. No, St. Martin's is a beautiful church. For anybody who hasn't actually been there, it's actually a lovely place to go and visit. It's quite a cafe downstairs as well in the crypt. It's just
it's one of the best kept secrets in London. Yeah, if you're bringing the family down to go around the museums and spend time in half-term holidays and things, it's it's expensive eating in London, and the cafe is absolutely wonderful.
So it has been a extremely busy year for you, what with all these different events going on and radio presenting, and congratulations, I believe, as well, engagement at the start of the year, if I am correct.
Thank you. Yes, that was a big surprise, and my partner Christoph got down on one knee in front of the Mayan Temple of the Magician in Mexico, and proposed to me, and said, "Well, it would have been rude to say no, rude to the gods to say no."
So, as well as this great news, what else are you working on this year? Do you have any other concerts coming up? Any other plans?
Yeah, lots of concerts actually. I've got a nice quiet January because December was very busy. It always is with concerts. But I'm doing Facade, which is Edith Sitwell's poetry set to music by William Walton at Sheffield Cathedral in March. It's an extraordinary piece because William Walton was 19 when he wrote that music, and it really runs the gamut of musical styles, everything from kind of village green brass band music to great symphonic sound. It's wonderful, and it's almost like early 1920s rap, because the poetry is delivered to the music, actually notated in the score. So it's really quite bonkers, and something I always wanted to do, and recorded it a few years ago. So that's in March. I'm doing Gaspars Foxtrot in Liverpool with the Liverpool Philharmonic in June. These are all on my website, zebsoanes.com, or the Gaspar website, gaspardthefox.com. And so if you want to come see Gaspars Foxtrot, that's in June. And then I'll be doing Gaspars Christmas, the new concert, in December. And you'll see those dates on the website too.
Amazing.
And the book, Peter the Cat's Little Book of Big Words, which is Peter the Cat, a character in the stories, always uses a big word in each story. So there's a little spin-off book, which is Peter's collection of his favorite big words, which will be coming out later this year.
Wonderful. The Gaspard series, are you other than obviously the one you've just mentioned, are you considering writing more in the series, or do you think you've sort of
Well, Reese, I always thought that 10 was a nice round number.
I like 10. 10 sounds good.
So I've always had that. I've got the next book. I've always been one book ahead because I've always lived in fear of not having any ideas, so I've always tried to be one ahead in the series. So the next one is worked out, and I've got some ideas for the one after that. There's nothing worse than your publisher phoning you up and saying, right, what's next? And absolutely nothing in your head.
Definitely. I mean, we spoke to Graphic last year, your publishers, Welsh publishers. It's one of their favorite books, and obviously it was printed in Welsh last year, I believe.
Yes, that's very good to hear. Yes, I've got it here actually. That was very exciting to see Nadolig Gaspar, to see Gaspars Christmas in Welsh. And yeah, they're a wonderful publisher, because one of the things that James and I talked about was wanting to reproduce the quality of books that we had as children. So books that were printed on thick, heavy matte paper that really felt special, that as a child you wanted to look after.
Yeah.
And Graphic have been wonderful in the print quality, so we're delighted with them.
No, they truly are beautiful. The actual quality of the books as well, as you've said, they are.
They smell good as well. They've got that nice book smell, which people don't talk about enough, I think.
So, last couple of questions from me. So, usually, what we tend to ask from any of the people who do these is, you've obviously mentioned Word on the Water, but are there any other bookshops that you gravitate towards when you're on your travels?
Oh, well, I mean, locally, there's the Broadway Bookshop on Broadway Market, which was my other local independent bookshop. There's Book Bugs and Dragon Tales in Norwich, which is the most wonderful bookshop. Norwich was my university city. And they have a wall, and any illustrators who go in are asked to illustrate on the wall. And so if you go in there, there's a very large Gaspar, which I think was one of the, I think Chris Riddle did something, and then I think Gaspar was the second. So he's very prominently there, and the staff are wonderful. Like all good independent bookshops, like a good library, you can just go in and ask for a recommendation, and they're absolutely brilliant. So that would be my top regional tip, I think.
We do love Norwich. We did a bookshop crawl in Norwich 2 years ago. Last 2 years ago. It was really lovely. There are some beautiful bookshops, and Book Bugs really did make us feel at home that day. They're lovely family that run it. It's a great place. And then final question for me then, in which case we tend to ask for book recommendations, things that you might recommend, current books, long-loved books, or upcoming books that you can't wait to read, that sort of thing. Anything that you can recommend to us?
I'm actually going to recommend one by this. This is one that James Mayhew has produced on his own, without me, I hasten to add. But James,
you weren't offended by that, I think.
James was doing a lot longer than me. But James, as well as being a fine illustrator, is also a terrific author, and it's called Once Upon a Tune. And when I was at school, I had this great music teacher, Mr. Taylor, who on the overhead projector, whilst playing a piece of music like Fingal's Cave, would illustrate it. And so that piece of music and all the others that he introduced me to are really deeply imprinted on my mind. And James has done something very similar by explaining the stories from music and illustrating them in a beautiful collage style that he has, very different to Gaspar. And James is going to be on tour with the Royal Scottish National Orchestra, as I was with Gaspard last year, with Once Upon a Tune. It's absolutely beautiful. It's one of those books that, you know, you can just pull off the shelf again and again, and great for schools to introduce children to music too. So that is my top tip.
Zeb, huge thank you for your time today. It really is appreciated. We wish you well in everything that goes on in 2023.
Thank you, and happy crawling.
Thank you.